Winterfell's stones remembered. After the long night, the castle kept the cold like an old oath, the chill seeping from flagstones and arrow slits into every hall. The gods would wear a white hush broken only by the soft creak of branches and the furtive shuffle of a fox somewhere under the bramble. The heart tree watched with its carved, bleeding eyes as if the red sap itself were a prayer too long forgotten and now recalled in the frost. Jon stood beneath those eyes with Ghost at his side. Snow lay along the direwolf's spine like ash on a banked fire. Ghost breathed and the air smoked. Jon had come alone because the old gods heard best when a man had no witnesses and no lies, and he had little left but those two. He laid his gloved palm to the weirwood's bark and felt the ridges fold and rise beneath his skin the way scars rise across a healed wound. A map of hurt that did not complain. He thought of his father in the way that grief teaches a man to think. Not of the man entire but of a gesture, of a moment when the world tilted and a hand righted it. He remembered a touch on his shoulder, a voice that said, "Next time you might learn to see it coming." He remembered a feast at which the girl he'd watched yet never spoken to laughed, and his father's glance had warmed him with a private smile that meant the same as a promise. That was years and a lifetime ago. The snow was the same. He was not. Duty would not speak to him except in the language of necessity. He had given his name and his life to the Night's Watch. He had died. The world had drawn him back. Oaths bound men and men broke them. Truths were swords, and some were forged only to be sheathed inside the breast. He had learned too late what name had been sewn into his bones. A name that burned and would not be spoken as long as he had any say in it. Ghost nuzzled his hip. Jon scratched behind the wolf's ear and looked toward the gray light gathering in the east. Today the long tables would be pulled beneath the antlered chandeliers in the great hall. Today, the North would come to Winterfell with their standards, some tattered, some new, all of them heavy with ice. Today he would ask them to choose a queen, and he would not be the choice. The snow fell more softly as if the sky, too, had decided to speak in a lower voice. He bowed his head to the face in the tree. "Let me do this right." It was the simplest prayer he had. He could not ask for victories, for he no longer believed wars ended where old men said they would. He could not ask for love. He could not ask for peace, only for the stubbornness to build it plank by plank, even if the sea took every plank but one. When he left the God's Wood, his breath had turned his beard crisp. Ghost trotted ahead, his red eyes bright against the snow glare. In the outer ward, grooms led horses to water and stamped and blew on their hands. The blackened wreckage of burned wagons still stood near the old armory like charred bones to remind each passing man of what had been consumed to keep the living from going colder than dead. The dead had been burned as well, and their smoke had drifted into the lungs and hair and wool of every soul in the castle until it felt as if the pyres would never leave them. The winter wind had done its slow work. Now only the smell of tallow and the iron tang from the smithy clung to the place. Ser Davos found him on the steps. "They're coming," the Onion Knight said, rubbing his hands together. "A long line of cold noses and longer memories. I'd say that makes a council." The old knight's smile was small and tired and true. He had learned to smile that way when truths were not enough and lies would not do. "Thank you, Davos. Thanking me is wasted breath, lad. If you're set on this, better save your air for the lords and ladies who will want to hear their own names before any wisdom you have to offer." "I'm set." Jon glanced aside at the banners that were already unfurling above the walls. The dire wolf of Stark, the silver trout of Tully in the guest yard, bronze runes of the Royces from the Vale. They had become family in all but law. The green merman of Manderley had not yet appeared, but White Harbor had sent riders ahead, their cloaks salt-stiff and lined in white fur. Robert Glover's silver gauntlet flapped from a lance at the inner gatehouse. He had come with 20 men, chins tucked deep into their collars. Other standards he could not yet see were murmured by the wind at the far road. Hornwood, Serwyn, Risswell. The Umber's place at table would stand draped in black, the boy's small bones long since given to fire. The Bear of Mormont would been hung with mourning. There were more empty places than when he had first ridden from Winterfell to take the Black, and yet the hall would be crowded. Davos followed his gaze. It's not a simple thing to take something you were offered and offer it to another. I was offered too much, Jon said, and not by them. He had no wish to speak her name now, not with the wind listening. You think Lady Sansa will accept? She will do what she thinks is needed. He had learned that much. Every lesson Sansa had taken from King's Landing and the Dreadfort had become a bone in the new shape of her, and she had not bent since. She was not the girl he had left. He was not the boy who had ridden south to stare at a wall of ice and swear himself into a family of men who could not call a child their own. In the great hall, heat lapped in waves from braziers and the great hearth. The long tables were bare. The trenchers and cups were stacked along the lowers tables, waiting. Great rushes lay fresh on the floor. Maester Wolkin's rookery had been busy. Ravens still returned with snow feathering their backs and crawled with their claws along the beams while men shouted to one another to toss more wood on the fires. Sansa stood near the dais, her face calm in the light, her hair woven in a simple northern braid ringed by a silver fillet that held back the stray strands the wind loved to tug. She had set aside her finer southern samite for heavy wool dyed the color of the sky when storms were a day off, that deep blue that made her eyes look colder than they were. Brienne stood half a step back and to the side as if a wall had decided to walk and stand for a lady. Arya leaned by one of the pillars in her leathers, the hilt of needle peeking past the drape of her cloak. The look on her face was the same as the snows, soft and without mercy. Jon climbed the steps of the dais and stood with them. He did not know how to be a lord when he was with Sansa and Arya. He only knew how to be a brother. Ghost rolled onto his haunches in the shadows behind the high seat as if the direwolf, too, had decided that today a hall was also a forest. Sansa said only, "Are you ready?" She did not ask him if he was sure. The difference felt like kindness. He nodded. "Then we'll be ready as well." She looked toward the doors where the ushers took their places. She had chosen no trumpet blast, no high shouting of names. The North did not want to be told who they were, only to be reminded that they were that still. They came in the measured disorder of a people who could never be told precisely what to do but did everything that must be done. Jon Royce's bronze breastplate threw the firelight in thick, dull reflections as he strode in with a squire and 2 knights of the Vale. The boy from the Eyrie had sent him as guardian and swordsman both. Lord Serwyn entered stiffly in furs. The scar along his cheek looked white as chalk. Robert Glover sat as if his hinge of a back had rusted in the cold and every motion hurt. House Tallheart had sent a woman with 3 scars over her knuckles and eyes that weighed. From White Harbor came Ser Marlon Manderly, nephew to Lord Wyman, broad and pale, his beard neatly combed and salted by the walk through the ward. They filled the benches with their men until every murmur became a low growl of voices. When it quieted, the hall held that taut silence that is not silence at all but the tension of a bowstring. Sansa waited. She had learned the handling of silence well. Silence is a blade if you know which part of you to cut first. When the last lord had taken his place, Jon stepped forward. "My lords," he said, "my ladies." He could feel each pair of eyes take his measure as if he were a sword they were weighing in hand. He kept his voice from rising too far. Words that need to be chased never come back willingly. "You have bled for Winterfell, and I have bled with you. Many who should be here cannot be. The dead took them, and the living were saved by the dead's cost. Nothing I say will pay that debt. Nothing I say will be enough. Still, I must say what is needful." He found Davos in the crowd and let that steady, unremarkable face anchor him, then looked back to the benches. The North is asked for oaths again. We are told we must kneel to keep what we have, as if a man must kneel to keep his feet. We have gone on our knees to the winter, to our hunger, to wrath and to sorrow and to 1,000 small tyrannies that call themselves necessity. No more. I have called you to the castle of House Stark for a council of the North, that we may say who we are and how we will be ruled. There was a shifting, a stir, like wheat across a threshing floor. Men leaned on elbows and on their neighbors. Benches creaked. Sansa's gaze pricked the back of his neck. Arya's was a thrown knife that did not miss. "My father taught me that the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword." Today I will not pass the sentence. I will offer you my judgment, which is only a man's. The North needs a Stark to lead it, not because blood is magic, but because the name is a promise that we remember. The wars of the South have torn our skinnier seams too often. Men from places with longer summers come north in winter and ask us to forget our own winter for theirs. We will not forget. He turned and looked at Sansa. The hall followed his eyes. He had seen men flinch beneath less attention. Sansa did not. "I am no king," Jon said, and the murmur sharpened. "I have been called one and would not be one. My blood is not important. My choice is. Lady Sansa Stark is the Lady of Winterfell, trueborn and the rightful heir to the name and its duty. I ask you to choose her as your sovereign, queen in the North." The words fell and hit like snow on a frozen river. Softly and hard, the silence changed, turned from bowstring to held breath. Brienne's hand tightened around the leather of her scabbard until the knuckles nearly matched it for color. Arya's mouth tilted as if she had kept a secret and now discovered she did not mind the weight. No one spoke, and then someone did. It was Robert Glover, his voice like a ladder rung missing a step. "We raised you king once," he said. "We cried your name once. Did you tire of it?" "I never wanted it," Jon said calmly. "You know this. I took what was given to do what needed doing. It was Arya and Sansa and all of you that broke the Boltons and made Winterfell stand. The night came and we stood again. I did not save you. We saved us. I will not be a king because you do not need one like me. You need a Stark who knows the North from inside its bones." Robert Glover's eyes went to Sansa and then to the empty table laid with black cloth for the umbers, then down to his calloused hands. He did not answer. Ser Marlon Manderly rose, his voice smoother, a kind of courtesy that could be turned without ever quite cutting. "Lady Sansa is my lord's blood ally," he said. "White Harbor remembers who remembered us when it mattered. But the sea will ask its own price no matter who wears the crown. We have ships and we have fish and we have grain to move before the harbor's ice. If we choose you, Lady Sansa, will the North stand together to keep the great roads open and men fed and not simply cheering?" Sansa did not look to Jon or to anyone. "Yes," she said, her voice not loud and not small. "We will do what is needed. We will keep men fed. If grain runs thin in the Barrowlands, we will ration at Winterfell. White Harbor's levy will be supported with leather and iron from the rills and Barrow Hall. House Serwyn's woods will supply charcoal for the smiths. The rills' cattle will winter in shared pastures where the snow is thinner. I have spoken with your factors already, Sir." I did not wait to see whether to speak to them, only what the words would be called when they were said. That drew a few grunts that were nearly laughs. Jon Royce stood next, and the dull bronze runes on his breastplate caught the fire. "The Vale does not belong to the North," he said. "But the Lady Sansa belongs to more than one or the other. I was her guardian after a fashion and would be again, though I'd not presume to command a queen. If the North chooses her, the Knights of the Vale will hold the Bloody Gate and the high passes so no southern army can climb behind your backs while you look to your own doors. We will not kneel to a northern queen. We will stand beside her as allies in honor. My lord the boy at the Eyrie consents to this in all things that he understands and in some that he does not." A few smiles rippled. "The Vale may make its own parliament in time. For now, let the North remember that the mountains are its friends." A woman from House Tallheart, a leaner by the introductions, looked from Sansa to Jon. "You ask for a queen," she said. "Who holds the sword if she must pass a sentence? Who swings it?" Her mouth made no apology for the question. "We have learned enough about men swinging swords for us." Sansa's gaze flicked to Arya and then to Jon and back. "The sword will be swung," she said. "If it must be me, it will be me. If the sentence is for a man whose death will set better fear if it is Jon's sword that strikes, I will ask my brother. I will not hide behind a man's arm unless I have chosen to hide for reasons more than fear. I am afraid of many things. I will be queen afraid, and I will not pretend courage where there is only stubbornness. The North deserves more than that." There were men who did not know how to measure that kind of answer. They fidgeted. Others looked steadier. Maester Wolkan cleared his throat and raised his hand, parchment already clutched in it, as if a vote could be counted like tally marks. "In the time of Torrhen Stark," he began, when Sansa cut him off gently with a glance and a faint lift of 2 fingers. "Thank you, Maester. The stories are known." A voice that had not yet spoken rose. Old Lady Barbary Riswell was not present, but her younger kinsman stood in her stead. He smelled of horse and frost and a little of arrogance earned and not. "And what of the Dragon Queen?" he asked. "She sits in your castle. She listened to our oaths and did not cheer when we did not shout them loudly enough. Will she permit this crowning? Do we choose today only to find ourselves with a dragon over our barns tomorrow?" No one turned to look at the figure near the rear wall, slight and pale, whose quiet had been so complete that the hall had forgotten her presence until that moment. Tyrion Lannister stepped forward before he was fully seen. "Her Grace Daenerys Targaryen is your ally," he said. "She flew north to fight for the living without asking what they would pay her when the dead were done. She expects fealty from those she saved, as any sovereign would, and as any sovereign should." His eyes flicked toward Jon and then, more carefully, toward Sansa. "But she is not blind to the truth that the North is not the Reach or the Stormlands. There are compacts that can be made, oaths that are not kneelings." He had said what he had to say, cleverly and with enough vagueness to make any choice sound like wisdom if it were chosen and victory if it landed. It was Sansa who answered. "The Dragon Queen will hear our choice," she said. "She will find in me an ally and in the North a people who do not forget their debts and do not yield their lives to pay debts twice." A murmur of approval stirred like small birds from eaves. Jon felt the hall lean forward. He felt it in his chest. The wind hissed at the arrow slits. He could not make this happen. He had done his part. Men must do the rest. Lord Serwyn stood, and the scar along his cheek reddened as blood rose. "I lost 2 sons to cold and 1 to a black Walder," he said. "I do not have to like the taste of a thing to know it must be eaten. If a queen gives me a reason to wake in the morning and think my people have a name for their hope, I'll take it. I vote Stark." He said the last as if he spat out a grudge and found it tasted like water after all. Robert Glover took longer to rise. When he did, the noise in the hall dimmed of its own accord. "I was wrong once," he said. "I was wrong to keep my men at home when your banners rose, Jon Snow. I will not be wrong now. Queen in the North." He did not look at Jon when he said it. He looked at Sansa like a man who had spent all day cutting wood and knew the last log had to be split before he went in to sleep. Others rose. Tallheart, Hornwood. Even the envoy from the Crannogmen who had watched the proceedings with a duck hunter's patience nodded and said in a voice that sounded like reed pipes, "The neck remembers Stark. The reeds bend and rise as they always did when the river runs. Queen is only a sound. We listen for the footsteps that go with it," which was as strong as a marshman's oath ever sounded, and strong enough. Wolkan's counting took little time. He approached the dais with trembling parchment and eyes round as if he'd learned that numbers could themselves be weather. "It is nearly unanimous, my lady," he murmured, emotion thinning the voice into youth. Those who did not vote abstained. None opposed with their lips. Sansa nodded and looked to Jon, to Arya, to the great hall. He felt it before he heard it. The tremor of benches as men pushed back to their feet. The scrape of iron on wood as swords were drawn and reversed and hammered point down against the floor. A roar rose, not the kind that boasted but the kind that returned to men their own names. "The Queen in the North," they shouted, the words rushing the rafters, thudding back down. "The Queen in the North." Sansa did not flinch. She breathed once, a breath Jon knew too well, as if she were stepping into water that might be ice. She did not smile. She bowed her head once, as if to the old gods, and raised her chin again like a standard. Later, when the hall had drunk enough to soften its edges but not so much that it lost its shape, Jon found her in the solar with a ledger open and 3 candles guttering against their own pools of wax. A map lay beneath the ledger. She had pinned the corners with a dirk and a metal cup and one of the carved direwolves that had once decorated the mantelpiece. She had drawn ink lines along the King's Road and then drawn short hash marks along those lines, notations of supplies and distances and numbers of oxen that could be spared and numbers of men who could not. "You knew they would choose you," he said. "I knew we would give them one choice that sounded like remembering and one that sounded like forgetting," Sansa said without looking up. Then she lifted her eyes. "But I did not know whether they came here to remember or to forget. I hoped. You should have had more faith in them." "No," she closed the ledger. "Faith is a luxury. Accounting is a duty." He found himself laughing softly, the sound small and helplessly fond. "Mother would have said the same. She would have said it more sharply and then made me eat something." Sansa touched the silver fillet above her ear as if making sure it had not taken root there. "You were brave today." "It was not bravery," Jon said. "It was a relief. You could have told them your truth and made them your truth." She said it flatly. "Others would have. Varys is writing his little letters in his mind even now. He will write them with his ink before long. He will tell any who listen that your name is a name that might be burned into banners. I do not want it. I know." She hesitated, her gaze flickering to the window where the snow made tiny shards in the air. "Others want it for you. That is more dangerous." He took a slow breath. "Daenerys will not like what we did. Daenerys would not like it if, after the winter, we chose to say we were cold," Sansa said. "But she is not blind. That is what her hand said. And he is clever even when he's wrong. She wants a realm that bends with her. The North will not bend. It does not know how. We can only choose whether to break or to be left alone. Left alone is not what she crossed the world to do." Sansa's mouth flattened. "Then she will not leave us alone. So we will be allies who do not kneel. Allies who send men and materials to a war in the South because we cannot bear the South's suffering or its foolishness. Not because we are afraid of those things. We will say so plainly and make our oath a bargain between equals. And we will hope that is enough. It may not be." He saw again the shadow that moved across a city wall when a dragon's wing cut against the sun. He felt the heat of a breath that was not breath. "She is good and angry both." "So are you," Sansa said softly. "You are angry with your life for having been chosen for you and with your heart for not being as simple as it used to be. You are angry with secrets and with men who think secrets are a kind of law. I am angry with men who make girls into things to be owned and with women who take what hurts them and pass it down the line as if it were duty. I am angry with the winter for making me clever and with the summer for not lasting longer. You see, we have anger. We are still our country." He could not help it. He reached for her hand. She did not pull it away. Her fingers were cool, the knuckles narrow, the nails trimmed blunt for convenience. He squeezed once. "You'll not do this alone. I never expected to." She looked over his shoulder past him and he knew without turning that Arya was in the doorway, quiet as a thought you don't notice until it taps your shoulder. "You leave no doors closed," Arya said. "I thought queens prized their doors." "Queens prize information," Sansa returned. "Come shut it." Arya took the chair with her knee and sat with the bonelessness of a cat. "You did well, Jon. You looked like you were going to vomit and didn't. That's how you know you've grown up." "I've learned from you," he said dryly. "Good. You can learn more. Sansa is queen. That means people will try to kill her. Some will think they are doing the world a favor. Some will think they are doing her a favor. Some will do it only because they cannot stand the idea of a girl who tells them what to do. We will have to be faster." "We?" Sansa repeated, a small lift in her voice. Arya shrugged. "Who else? Brienne is good and large and honorable. I am not large. Between us, we make a complete door." Sansa smiled then, briefly, and the room warmed a fraction. "We need Davos. We need White Harbor's patience. We need Royce's mountains. We need letters sent to Riverrun to make sure the Tullus do not find themselves between a dragon's shadow and a Lannister's sins. And we need to talk to the Queen Daenerys before Tyrion's words make a net around us instead of a path." "I will speak to her," Jon said. "Of course you will," Sansa said carefully. "But I will be there." She must hear the north from a voice that does not love her. It stung him a little as it was meant to. He bowed his head. "I'll stand in the corner and play with a dagger," Arya offered. Sometimes that helps. It did not help. It could only prepare him for how much help would not help. Daenerys received them in a chamber warmed beyond comfort. 2 braziers and a roaring hearth put a Southron sheen on the walls. Tapestries hung with woven gardens and pomegranates did not sweat. Those had been chosen by a hand that knew things should not appear to be merely what they were. Grey Worm stood near the door with 3 unsullied, whose silence was not neutral but grim. Missandei sat by a small table with quills and a vellum that lay blank but would not remain so. Tyrion stood a little apart in the space men in courts give to those who might need to speak for them or against them. "Why were you not here to tell me before you told them?" Daenerys asked without greeting. There were blue shadows under her eyes, the color of a bruise beneath marble. "I flew north when the north cried for help. I brought my blood and my fire and my people to die here among stones that do not warm themselves. I broke death for you as much as any man might break it. And in return you choose a queen to stand against me." "No," Jon said. He took the force of the words into his chest and let them out carefully. "We chose a queen to stand for the north. Not against you. We will not kneel. We will not fight you either. You cannot offer me half an oath," she said, and there was a tremor in her voice that only those who stood near enough would have heard, the tremor of a kept breath too long. "You cannot say you are mine and then say you are not mine where it suits you. The realm does not mend by coming apart. The realm does not mend by setting its bones wrong and waiting for them to knit crooked," Sansa said, and Jon's stomach tightened at the sound of her voice beside him. How steady it was. "You want loyalty. We offer alliance. You want submission. We offer respect. We will send men and food and iron and leather to your war. We will not kneel. We will govern the north as the north. We will pay tariffs and share the river crossings and the roads with such tolls as keep those roads whole. We will accept your envoys and send you our own. We are not your enemy. We are not your subjects." Daenerys looked between them as if the space between the two were the measure of something she could not yet see. She turned toward the hearth, and for a heartbeat Jon saw the girl beneath the titles. A girl who had walked down the bony lanes of a city that did not want her and found in her brother's vices an ugly mirror of her loneliness. A girl who had walked out of fire and believed a story about what that meant. When she faced them again, there was steel where he had seen girl once. "I will take King's Landing," she said softly. "I will make a kingdom where men do not nail children to signposts and women are not bought by the weight of their father's sorrows. I will do it with or without you. Do it with us," Jon said. "And when it is done, let the realm choose what it will be. Call a council of the great lords and small folk, 2 if you dare it, and let them decide if their king or queen is a person or a promise. Let them decide whether the north is a country or a ward." Tyrion's head tilted, a fox catching a scent. Missandei watched for words she might need to interpret into another tongue, taking their measure. Grey Worm's eyes flicked to Daenerys' face and back to Jon, as if calculating distances that could be crossed with a spear thrust.
Daenerys Smoutbent.
"You ask me to do what is already mine by right." "By right of what?" Sansa asked. She did not add blood. She did not need to. Both women heard it echo in the small spaces between their breaths. "By the right of a story told to you as a child?" Jon came north and swore vows that cost him his life and then his love of his life. He asks you to make yourself the thing you tell yourself you are. He asks you to earn what you say is already yours. That is not cruelty. It is an offer of mercy to you. The words cut clean. Jon felt them bite him as well. He could not stop it. They were true. Daenerys' eyes glowed in the firelight like copper coins, heated to a dull red. "You will send me men," she said. "You will send your ships, White Harbor, and your food. I will not burn Winterfell. I will not burn its lands. But when I sit upon the Iron Throne, I will ask again. And I will not ask in such a way that no is a word with a place to stand." She dismissed them with a lifted hand that looked graceful and felt like a door closing. There was no satisfaction in Sansa's face as they walked the corridor back to their own halls. Only calculation and something that was not fear exactly, but had learned to live with fear so long it could pass for kin. "She will not forgive us," Sansa said. "She does not have to," Jon answered. "She only has to remember what we will do and what we will not. Men like Varys will not sleep," she said, as if changing subject and not changing it. "Tyrion will not sleep much either. They will not be the first to lie awake in Winterfell," he said, and this time she did smile. The days after were full of work braided with waiting. Wagons were requisitioned. Oxen were counted and then counted again. Men who had not been south of Moat Cailin in all their lives were chosen by their lords to ride with the grain trains as far as White Harbor so their tongues could tell a matching story when questions came. Sansa held court under the carved beams in the small hall, where the ceiling seemed lower and the problems more honest. A Kottar stood with hat in hands and squinted as if he'd lost sight of justice down a long furrow and could not yet find it. A boy asked whether the queen would send men to hunt the wolves that had taken 2 of the best cows. She sent 3 of the queen's men with bows and called for a weir of thorn along the north side of the pasture. She listened to a widow from the winter town whose roof had caved under snow and gave her a place in the castle kitchens until the men from Cerwyn could mend it. She accepted salt and bread from an envoy from White Harbor and earned the envoy's gratitude by eating both with an appetite that did not pretend. She wrote letters. She made Davos read them and made Arya read the places where her anger had made her careless. At night, Jon went to the godswood more often than he would have admitted. He had never spoken many words to the weirwood because he was never sure which ones counted. He did not know if the old gods minded gaps in his sentences, the places where a word did not exist that did not taste like a lie. Ghost learned the paths and walked them before him and behind him both, a white shadow in the half-light. Ravens carried south more than grain and men. Letters flew like black leaves. Varys's whispers grew legs. It took only 3 days for a folded note sealed in drab wax to arrive with no signet at all, and to find its way into Davos's hand with the quiet deference of a man who did not want his name remembered. It took only the time to break that seal for a truth to step into the room with the same small sound a knife makes when it slips from a sheath. Davos held the parchment as if it would burn, or as if it had already burned and only the char remained. He looked at Jon like a man who had to bless bad weather and did not quite know how to pronounce the words. Then he handed it to Sansa. She read grave-faced, not pausing as her eyes moved, only once pursing her lips and then smoothing them again with the tip of her tongue, as if a wind had worried a flame and she had decided the best way to keep it alight was to hold very still. She passed it to Jon without speaking. The words were no longer a secret between few. Aegon Targaryen, the letter called him, called his father by his name, called his mother by hers. It did not gloat, it did not curse. It stated, as a maester might state the phase of the moon, that there existed a man who could claim what a woman already claimed with fire and blade and the dull weight of a throne made to bleed the backs of those who sat on it. If Varys sends 10, this is the second, Sansa said. The others have gone to Storm's End, to Riverrun, to Sunspear, to Old Town. He has chosen his net and cast it wide. He does not understand nets that are made of ice. You should keep your counsel, Jon said. He had meant to say nothing, but he found the words were a horse that had started before he had put his foot in the stirrup. We will not bend our truth to another because it is suddenly fashionable. Do you want me to deny it? She asked it gently. No, he pushed air out of his lungs. I want you to deny what comes with it. The North must not become a staging ground for a fight that will eat us in its first course and pick its teeth with our bones. We will make sure it doesn't, she said. You will. I will. There are kinder men than Varys, and there are worse men. His letters will stir every kind of man. The wheel turned faster than letters could fly. News came one morning on a lathered horse, then on 2 more, like the way a storm sends thin spears of rain ahead of the real downpour. Euron Greyjoy had turned the mouth of the Blackwater into a cage with his ships. The Dragon Queen had burned some and scattered others with a sweep of wing and fire that made some men swear and some men smile and some men wonder what light on old stones would look like if it were not sunlight. The Golden Company had marched, had stood, had fallen, had stood again. Tyrion had been seen entering the city through a hidden postern. Then the bells had rung. The bells had rung. After that, the words in every letter were fewer and starker and sounded more like the words of men who would not mention their own names later. The bells had rung, and the city had burned. Jon stared at the last letter and did not breathe for a few heartbeats. The wax seal had broken badly, like an old scab picked off with a dirty nail. He put it down very carefully, and even so the edge tore a little under his thumb. He would always remember that the way a thing that had already been damaged had yielded again without protest. Arya read over his shoulder. He could not make himself tell her not to. When she finished, she took the letter to Sansa and did not say that she was sorry. Sansa read. She did not put the letter down. She stood with it as if it were a writ of judgment against her that she would appeal not with argument but with stubbornness. "How certain," she said after a while, and her tone was not shock but inventory. "Certain," Davos said. "Too many mouths saying the same words, and no one eager to please us among them. Lord Manderley's man saw smoke from the sea 3 days sail off and said that it turned the clouds red at dusk. She did what her enemies said she would do," Sansa said in a voice that tried to be steady. She told herself stories about why it would save more lives. And she told herself those stories until she did not have to hear them anymore. Jon's hand found Ghost's ruff and closed on it. The coarse hair grounded him. "She's not only that," he said. It sounded like a defense. It sounded like an apology. It sounded like he had not decided whether he was making one or the other. "She is what she chooses," Sansa said. She lifted her head. "And so are we." She folded the letter and set it down, weighed it with the small direwolf paperweight as if the head would bite if the wind tried to steal it. The days that followed were colder, though the wind did not cut as harshly. The North heard and watched in its own way. Men who had not wept at their father's pyre wept now in the smokehouse where no one saw. Women who had grown quiet in their losses grew quieter in their knowledge that there were losses yet to come that had not yet chosen names for themselves. The snows fell and were cleared and fell again. The world continued in that stubborn, insulted way that worlds do when men do ugly things and want the sky to take note. The raven that announced the Great Council came late to Winterfell because its wings had iced. Maester Wolkan warmed them with careful breath between his palms as he lifted the bird free of the wicker and read the message painted by a different master's careful hand. The lords and ladies of the realm were called to King's Landing to choose who would sit upon a breakable throne and call it strength. Jon could feel Sansa's mind jump 5 strides ahead. He could see the thought as it landed. "We will not go. We will send men who can speak our words. We will not kneel to any chair. Send Lord Royce," she said. "Send a Manderley. Send Edmure Tully if he will remember whose niece I am. Send anyone who can be counted on to bring us what they promised to carry back, which is respect and terms, not their own cleverness." She paused. "Brienne, will you go?" Brienne looked up from where she had been checking oil on the hinge of her left gauntlet, as careful about such things as any peasant was about a good knife. "If you command it." Her absence would cut a shape from Sansa's guard that everyone would notice. It would make Sansa more vulnerable in one way and stronger in another. Brienne saw it and did not flinch. "If I go, I will watch for the thing which is hardest to spot, which is a lie a good man tells himself." "Do that," Sansa said. "Arya," Jon said, "will you go?" She smiled like a fox who has found out that the hounds lost the scent last night and have not yet learned it was because the fox had no intention to run. "No," she said. "I think the most dangerous man I can watch right now will be watching me when I sleep, and I'd rather he watched an empty bed." She tilted her head. "Go, Jon." Sansa's eyes flicked to him. He felt the question and the answer both. "I cannot," he said, but as he said it he understood that he would. "I do not want to be there." "That is why you must be," Sansa said. "Men will slide your name into every blank space in their sentences no matter what is real. They will try to make you the lever they use to move things they could not move with their own hands. If you are there to refuse, you will refuse. If you are not there, they will pretend you did not refuse." He had been refusing all his life. He was tired of the small exhaustions that come from setting a cup down on a table and finding you must set it down again because the table is crooked and someone else thinks crooked tables are the only kind. He nodded. "I'll go," he said. He looked at Arya. "You keep her safe." Arya did not say that she would. She lifted one shoulder and let it fall, and in that motion was a promise stronger than any oath that ever called upon the stars. He did not sleep well the night before he rode south. He went to the Godswood and found it too crowded with absence. He walked the yard and found it too heavy with memory. In the stables, Ghost watched him pack with that patient look wolves have when they know more of your mind than you would hope and less than you fear. In the dim of dawn, Sansa met him in the hall and took his hands. "You gave me something I wanted and did not dare to want," she said. "If the world breaks again, it will not be because you gave me this." "The world breaks whether we stand there or not," he said. "But I am glad to be standing with you when it does." "You always will be," she said lightly, as if it were a joke and the only truth that mattered. He rode with a small guard and Davos at his shoulder. The King's Road ran like an old scar, clear where men had cleared it and puckered where neglect had. They passed inns where the roof leaned and liable to collapse under a hard winter night. They passed hamlets in which only 2 chimneys smoked. They crossed the Trident under a sky the color of cold steel and rode down out of the neck where the reeds hissed and the frogs watched them with unblinking judgment. King's Landing rose from its own ashes like a story that had already been told and did not bear hearing again. The walls were scorched. The gatehouses wore their black the way old men wear old clothes, because new ones would be a lie. The smell of charcoal and the ghost of cooked meat lingered in the alleys that had been swept so clean you could have eaten off the stones if not for the knowing. The Red Keep had lost some of its face and showed its broken teeth to the sea. They held the council in the dragon pit because it was big enough to hold the weight of what they thought of themselves. No dragons slept there. Only men who wanted to call themselves by larger names. They chose Bran. Men would later say that it had been inevitable or that it had been clever or that it had been the only thing left that would not bite. Jon watched his brother's eyes hood like a hawk's as the realm made itself a sketch of a promise. Bran's silence weighed more than their speeches. They gave Sansa what she had already taken: recognition for the North's independence. It was written down as if the writing made it so. Jon said no when anything in the room turned toward him. He said no with a small voice until the small voice became a wall that did not have to be tall to be unscalable. There was no one left to speak for Daenerys among the well-fed and the well-loved. There was only the shadow of her fire. Tyrion looked older by a handful of winters. He talked like a man shaving while the ship rocked and knew even the sharpest razor will draw blood. Brienne stood with her hand on her sword's hilt and listened to the room like a mason listens to mortar. Davos sat with his hands quiet. Jon did not look for the queen who had burned. When he thought of her, it was never in fire but in a cold corridor in Winterfell where the candles had guttered and her breath had fogged in the same air that had held his, and they had looked at each other and not known which way the door would open next. When it was done, he turned his horse north and let the wind peel the ash stink from his clothes and the council's voices from his ears. The farther he rode, the better the sky breathed. At Moat Cailin, the ravens beat the marsh air as if proud of their own flight. The next slow water had a strong smell of life. He rode into Winterfell under a snowfall that did not promise anything and therefore did not lie. Sansa met him beneath the gate. Her eyes, when she lifted them to his, looked like 2 pieces of northern sky cut to fit a woman's face. "Well," she said. He told her. She nodded when he said Bran's name, once, as if she had been holding the decision in her body and could finally put it down. "Good," she said. "He will not make a poem out of it. He will make a table and a ledger." "And the North?" he asked, though he knew. "The North is as it was," she said. "As it should be. As it will be if we make it that." She reached up and touched his cheek with wintercool fingers. "Stay," she said. The word was light and weighted both. "Stay for as long as staying is something you can do." "I will," he lied, and something in her face said she had heard the lie and forgave it for its courtesy. For a time he did stay. The North learned the habits of a queen as it had learned the habits of winter. Sansa spoke justice with the patience of someone who had been denied it too long and the ferocity of one who would not deny it to another. She called the lords to her small council in a room where the tapestries were of pines and ravens and a river running under ice, and she learned to listen to men who had learned to listen to her. She appointed a master of grain. Ser Marlon Manderley, it turned out, had a head for figures that rivaled a careful banker's, and a captain of the roads from Barrowton, whose wife was a woman with a mouth like a closed fist but a mind that opened like a door. She told the Riswells that if their men harried Cranagman hunting parties again, they would walk down from their horses and learn how men without horses hunted. And when a poacher was brought before her for taking a stag on Umberland because his daughter would not last the winter without meat, she fined him and then hired him as a keeper of the Queen's Wood because the man could shoot well enough to be useful and tell crows from cottagers. Arya moved through the castle like a rumor that kept choosing to be true. Brienne rode between rooftops when needed and stood like a tower when standing would do. Davos sat by the hearth when the day was done and taught the young squires how to count fingers and return change in fair measure. The night men had learned to be men again. Some of them found they did not like it and went back to the wall that was less a wall than an old scar, to guard a world that had learned other dangers. Jon waited. He waited until the weight of the old oaths found him again. He had been north of the wall and south of it and under it, and no man could say with clarity which place he belonged. But he knew the sound that his heart made when it stood outside in the cold and listened to wolves and did not expect any man to call him in. That sound felt like truth. One night he went to the Godswood and found Sansa there before him. The snow had drifted up around the roots. The face in the tree looked less like a face when the moon did not care to show it. Sansa wore a cloak lined with pale fur, the color of doves' throats. "You knew I would come here," he said. "I did," she said. "You come here when you are about to do something that will make me angry." The corner of her mouth moved. "You do it anyway." He looked up at the tree, then back to her. "I am going beyond the wall," he said. It was easier than making a speech. The Night's Watch has few men and fewer reasons. It will have one more. There are people there, and they need to be told they are still people. "Ghost will go mad if he can't run," Sansa said, as if it were a matter of logistics. "Who will you take?" "Men who are tired of having roofs over their heads," he said. "Men who can keep an oath even if no one hears it. Tormund, if he will have me. Others." "Go," she said. For a moment he thought she meant it gladly. Then she reached up and put her hand against his throat as she had done when they were children fighting in the yard and he had tried to wrestle her and she had tried to shout and neither had quite known how far was too far. The pressure was not painful. It was a reminder of a woman's strength that men think is not strong because it does not look like theirs. "But come back," she said. "Come back when the North needs you and when I need to look at a face that believes in what we made even when it is tired." "I will," he said again, and his voice was truer because he would try even if fate used his promise as a game piece. She lowered her hand. "The crown," she said in a different tone. "I had something made." He did not speak as she drew from beneath her cloak a circlet wrapped in rough cloth. When she unwrapped it, the candlelight that had found its way into the Godswood caught on bronze chased with iron and tiny runes hammered along the rim. The marks of the first men, a pattern more remembered than read. It was not Robb's crown. It was older, or it pretended to be older in the right way. "It should be worn in the Godswood first," she said. "That is how Papa would have wanted it, though he was not a man to speak of crowns." She placed it on her head, and for a moment both of them stood still and considered the difference that a circle of metal can make. Then she smiled, and it became less a crown and more a story that included other people. "It looks like it belongs," Jon said. "It does," she said. "And so do you." They said their goodbyes the way Northerners do when they dare not believe in luck, quietly and with something held in the throat against speaking. In the yard, Ghost loped and then circled to heel beside Jon's knee and then bounded away and back again, unable to choose between the instinct to range and the instinct to stay with the pack. The gates of Winterfell opened, and the world beyond was a sweep of white and gray and going. Jon rode out to the songs of no men, only the crunch of hooves and the small, cheerful complaints of leather. With him rode a handful of volunteers, Davos's lad with ears too big for his head and heart too large for the rest of him. A woman from Carhold who wore her dead husband's mail shirt without apology, and 2 wildlings who claimed to be cousins if the right river ran in the right direction. Tormund waited 10 miles north with men who had chosen not to trust walls anymore. They greeted Jon with insults that turned to embraces in the way wildlings had invented before anyone else dared it. At night, Jon lay in his bedroll and watched the sky try to become something besides itself. Ghosts breathing was his lullaby. He dreamed sometimes of the heart tree and sometimes of fire and sometimes of an empty throne with a sword laid across it like a coin over a dead man's eye. In his waking hours, he spoke truths to men whose truths were different and saw which would hold when the wind leaned. He judged disputes about traps set in the wrong valley and about a woman stolen and not stolen and about a boy who'd found a cache of old knives as if they'd waited for his hand. He stood with a spear while a giant shadow moved behind blue ice and turned out to be a moving cliff and not something that needed killing at all. He learned again how to let silence do some of the work. Back in Winterfell, Sansa wore the crown and what it meant. There were years in her days and days in her years. She smiled when she must and did not waste smiles where a nod would do. She sent ravens to White Harbor for more netting and fewer contrivances, and ravens to Barrowton for men who could mend wagon axles in snow and to Deepwood Motte for timber that didn't split on the first try. She heard petitions and took joy where it dared show itself. A girl's laughter in the courtyard when she stole a kiss behind a bale of straw. An old man who found a coin he'd dropped last winter and held it up as if it were a relic. The sound of Arya's bootheels when she came in from the yard with cheeks reddened and eyes bright. She went to the crypt when tears were a need and not a weakness. She visited the heart tree when she wanted to say nothing to anyone and to have that nothing mean something. She remembered that the pack survives. She learned how the pack also grows and loses and breeds new names and will not say them until they fit. When news came of a raiding party across the Shivering Sea, a hard, lean band that had found fishing villages too pliable and too proud to ask for help, Sansa sent men and a letter. The letter returned with a fishhook stuck through it and the ink smeared with sea salt. She sent ships this time and did not stop to write back. White Harbor sails cut the gray waves like knives. When the ships returned, fewer than had left and with ropes that smelled of blood, she did not call it victory. She called it done and paid the men and the women the same coin if they had rode the same tide. Sometimes at night she would stand on the battlements and listen. Winterfell in winter has a sound like the sea in storm and like sleep in a great house. She would think then of all the names she had worn and all the things that had tried to unname her. And she would think of Jon in the white world beyond the wall with Ghost. And she would let herself believe he was breathing the same cold air and thinking of her. He came back once in the spring that was not a spring but the winter remembering how to change. He rode into the yard with Tormund and half a dozen others, beards rhymed, eyes squinting as if warmth were a story they weren't ready to believe. He embraced her hard in the yard and for a moment forgot that yards have eyes. She forgot that too, just long enough to put her cheek to his shoulder and breathe in smoke and snow and fur. Arya grinned at them both like a conspirator of joy and then went to find something to throw at Gendry because it was how she said she was glad. They spoke inside where the air did not bite. He told her about an ice cave that sang when the wind moved across its mouth and about a boy who had learned to walk with a missing foot by leaning his weight correctly and calling it skill. She told him about a dispute over a swineherd's rights that would have become a small war if she had not noticed the swineherd's daughter looking at the miller's son like a path she wanted to walk and arranging matters so that the path became a road. "You're a good queen," he said when the candles had burned down to stub and the window glass filmed with their breath. "You're a worse liar than you used to be," she said, but her smile was grateful. He looked at the crown on the table. He reached for it and did not touch it. "I am proud of you, and I of you," she said, the words simple as stew and twice as warming. "You gave me the space to be this. You gave it to the north. You will not admit it in the hall when the men are listening. That is fine. You will admit it here." He laughed, and the laugh stuck a little at the end the way laughter does when it becomes a sob that refuses to finish itself. "I will." In the morning, he left again because that was the shape the world had given him and because not every leaving is a betrayal. He walked with Ghost through the gate and did not look back until he was beyond the first stand of trees. When he did look back, the walls of Winterfell looked less like a fortress and more like a promise someone had finished building and now had to maintain. Sansa did maintain it. Through one winter and then into the next that pretended to be spring while the rivers cracked their ice like old jokes. Through disputes and harvests and the slow mending of things men had thought forever broken. She kept the North together by refusing to pretend it was anything but itself. Visitors from the South came sometimes to call her Your Grace, as if it were the price of entry. She accepted the courtesies and sent them home with a memory of a queen who did not tremble when their rings flashed in the sunlight. She sat with Bran in the Godswood when he came north with small escort and larger silence. And they spoke as brother and sister and sovereigns, and not once did power smirk at them for managing to be more than one thing at a time. There were years. In some of them, wolves sang nearer the walls, and in some of them farther. In some of them, men tried to take what was not theirs, and Sansa made them bleed, and then made certain their sons did not bleed for their father's foolishness. In some of them, the rivers were fat, and in some of them they ran thin. She learned to count victory in small coins that paid for roofs and grain, and in the bigger coin of children who survived the cough and grew up to curse their parents in the usual way. She took sometimes to walking the wall at dawn. The light then had the color of old iron polished with snow. She would set one hand on the frost along the crenels and think of the girl who had stood in a southern courtyard wishing for songs and tournaments, and the lad with the golden hair who would say her name like it mattered. She would think of the woman who had learned instead how to make a small smile weigh more than a shout. And she would think of Jon, who had once called a council and offered a throne that was not meant for him, and by that offering taught her to take it without shame. On a morning years after the council, when men in far places argued about small points that mattered to them and not to her, she stood in the Godswood and listened to the wind in the leaves. It sounded like old names being said correctly. Arya came and stood beside her, and Brienne stood a little farther off on the path, and Davos was nowhere to be seen because he had gone down to the winter town to hear a story about a lost chicken and a found horse that both turned out to be the same beast. Sansa said, "Do you ever think of the girl you were?" Arya snorted. "Only when I want to laugh, and then sometimes when I want to cry. I think of her," Sansa said. She looked at the face in the tree until it stopped being a carving and became just bark again. "I think of all of them, the girls and the women. I think of the name Stark and how often it was used to cut us and how often we used it to cut others when we were too proud to be gentle. And I think that naming me queen did not make me a queen. Choosing to be one did. And I think Jon knew that. He usually knows the one thing he needs to," Arya allowed. Sansa smiled and looked up into the white branches. Snow began to fall, small flakes at first, and then bigger, slower ones that you could almost see decide where to land. She lifted her hand, palm upward, and felt them melt into the skin. "Winterfell remembers," she said. Arya said nothing. She did not have to. The Godswood held the words. The heart tree bled them into its trunk. Somewhere, very far north under a sky that flashed with quiet lights, a man and a wolf stood still and breathed the same air and thought of a place that had taught them how to stand. The snow fell. The pack endured. The North did not forget the day a man had put a crown into a woman's hands, not because it was light, but because someone had to carry it and she would not set it down.